check that all out. But welcome. So thanks for joining us. This is our second rendition of the Paris Ancaster webinar. We're excited to be back. Also slightly sad that we're not able to do it in person, obviously, but we're going to do the best with what we have. My name's Dalton, and I'm going to be hosting / facilitating the webinar for you guys. I'm one of the co-founders of the Movement Physio and Performance, which is a physiotherapy clinic in Dundas, Ontario. Last year, we did this webinar for the Paris Ancaster when everything got shut down. We were obviously hoping to be at the actual event, which didn't happen. So we thought that it would be awesome to try and put something in place of that, give you guys some cool information. And so this year we're back again, and the goal of this year is to, again, bring in a couple of different perspectives around how we can, I guess today's main focus is looking at recovery and training when it comes to cycling and preparing for something like the Paris Ancaster. So we have a variety of people. We have a dietitian here, Dee. We have a coach, and Andrew, media star, we'll call her, also coach, lover of cycling and all outdoor things, and Molly. And then we have Dawn, who is also one of the founders of the Movement Physiotherapy and Performance and is a physiotherapist. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have them introduce themselves so they can just give you guys some context into who they are. So I'm going to pass it over to Dawn. I'll have Dawn intro himself, and then he'll jump into kind of his discussion points. I'll kind of be there to maybe ask some questions and probe a little bit more out of them. And then we will pass it on to the other speakers. So Dawn, why don't you take it away and introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Dalton. And thanks everyone for helping us out with this, and for everyone who's taken time out of their evening to join us. As Dalton mentioned, I'm one of the other co-owners of the movement here in Dundas. I've been, like a lifelong cyclist. I've never fully committed. I have a hard time doing that for any sport because I love anything outdoors. So I tend to sort of bounce around between various outdoor pursuits, everything from rock climbing to mountain biking to trail running more intensely these days. But what I wanted to discuss today a little bit was some of the research around, the different modalities that we often hear about and often use for ourselves immediately after training or post race. So, there's lots of ways that people spend their time after a race or after a training session to, hopefully improve recovery, physical recovery. Some of those things that kind of come to mind include low intensity cycling, low intensity walking, low intensity resistance exercise, static stretching, soft tissue release or foam rolling, Theragun work. So what I want to do is kind of dive in a little bit on some of the research on that stuff, what maybe is happening and isn't happening with those techniques. And then kind of give a little summary of what I think is a good way to use your time after sessions based on the research. So first thing I want to clarify is that regardless of what the research sort of says on any of this stuff, if you found something that works for you, right, keep using them. Again, all I want to do is sort of discuss what the evidence says and maybe open up your mind to a different way of using that time that you're sort of, committed to after a training session or a race for that matter. So let's first start off with active recovery. So again, this is that low intensity cycling or walking, low intensity resistance exercise that a lot of coaches, athletes, and therapists alike tend to recommend for their athletes or use for themselves to, improve their ability to perform in a successive session. So what the research sort of says about active recovery is that it actually has very little impact on the recovery of our muscles after training or a performance bout. And certainly there's no difference in injury risk reduction versus not doing any cool down at all. What we know that active recovery does for sure is it can improve our cardiovascular and our respiratory recovery. So after a high intensity race or a high intensity bout of training, I think that it's probably a good idea to incorporate an active recovery to sort of bring yourself down out of a sympathetic state or an elevated state, right? It has a little bit less to do with, spinning out your lactic acid and, whatever else has been sort of like, put out there in kind of social media and whatnot, right? And less to do with like improving how your muscles feel the next day. Now, there is a little bit of evidence indicating that if you are going to be, for whatever reason, you've got a back-to-back, maybe you've got, something maybe like, an example that comes to mind would be something like the CrossFit Games, okay, where they have back-to-back days of high intensity output. There is some evidence for active recovery being beneficial for that next day of performance, right? But the reason that outside of those sort of specific cases, the reason that I think like, spending too much time on an active recovery there might be some better ways to use your time, is because I think it's really important, like if you've just done a super high intensity bout of exercise or you just finished, leaving it all on the table at a race, right? You're probably not looking to be, performing the next day, right? Again, there are some select cases where that may be the case, and then there's more support for spending 15, 20 minutes spinning it out, so to speak, right? But again, I think in most cases, you're going to be taking a recovery day after a high intensity output day or a race, and so there may be some other ways that you can kind of utilize that time, depending on, again, if you need to bring down your respiratory or cardiac system quickly, right? So again, if there's any questions about any of this stuff or what I'm saying, throw it out there on the chat. And again, I'll circle back on a bit of a summary towards the end. So the second big one out there is sort of things like foam rolling and Theraguns and self-soft tissue massage. Again, it's used a ton by lots of people, and a lot of people swear by it anecdotally. And if it feels like it works for you, again, like, if you've got something that works, sometimes stick with it, right? But the evidence is a little bit mixed. There is some evidence showing that there's some reduced delayed onset muscle soreness if you use it immediately post high intensity exercise. But it involved, it was a pretty small study, the one study that showed this, and it involved 20 minutes of foam rolling after that workout. So, again, this is where it comes back to how much time do we have as, athletes and humans and parents and full-time employees, right? If you've got, if you're already putting in like a long ride, like a 2-hour ride, or you've carved out like, an hour and 15 minutes for some interval work, or, for a warm up plus hill repeats, are you also going to carve out 20 minutes for foam rolling to hit that effect? It's about that sort of best use of time, right? But when we look at like bigger kind of systematic reviews that sort of accumulate the evidence and sort of look at it as a group, there's really been minimal effect shown, save for some reduced perceived muscle soreness immediately after the rolling. So, you know, if you were kind of doing like back-to-back sessions, if you're transitioning straight from a ride into a strength session or vice versa, again, maybe there's a role for spending that much time kind of, you know, putting in that work with the foam rolling and the Theraguns, right? The idea behind that stuff is that we're promoting blood flow and also kind of stimulating the nervous system and desensitizing things a bit, right? You know, so those are kind of like the two big things that people tend to kind of gravitate towards from a performance recovery perspective, right? Now, I guess like where my bias leans heavily from a recovery perspective and a risk reduction perspective is the importance of a really well-laid training plan, right? A training plan that incorporates deload weeks, that accounts for recovery days after cumulative stress, and, you know, consistency with a training plan leading up to a performance event, right? That consistency is so important, right? That said, I think anyone who's trained for an event can attest to the fact that you also, from an injury risk reduction perspective, need to be really willing to be flexible based on how your body's responding to that cumulative training, right? And so I think that's the best tool for recovery and injury risk reduction is a well-laid training plan. But again, all that said, if you find that like a light aerobic cool down or foam rolling or something like that is particularly effective for you, by all means. That said, you know, where those two things are, you know, there's super solid evidence for is incorporating them as part of an effective warm-up, right? And warm-ups, you know, if you're short of time, right? There is sound evidence indicating that a good warm-up, you know, including, you know, bringing up promoting a circulatory effect, increasing body temperature, priming key muscle groups, and maybe dynamically addressing some known mobility concerns. There's some sound evidence that that is going to improve in performance and decrease injury risk, okay? And so if you're short on time, maybe I think that's an important place to use some of those tools that we just talked about because the evidence is stronger for that, okay? Now, I know I'm kind of talking a little long here, so which, you know, Dalton can attest to that being status quo for me. I want to keep it reasonably tight, and so I want to sort of I don't want to miss one of the best things that you can do for recovery, which is focus on your sleep, right? After a performance, after a high intensity bout of exercise or training, and generally throughout the training season, sleep is one of the most critical things for improving performance and making sure that your body is recovering, right? And again, there's sound evidence supporting that with regards to improved performance and injury risk reduction. So what am I recommending? I'm recommending, you know, a really solid warm-up, which might involve some of the things that we traditionally think of as physical recovery tools, focusing in on your sleep, paying attention to some of the stuff that's going to be talked about later in this webinar, which is, you know, your post-workout nutrition, which I think Dee is going to dive into, and kind of the global training plan, which I believe Molly and Andrew are both going to touch on, right? And then with regard to that time, that block of time after a workout, right? If you have that extra time, I would advocate for using that cool down period as an opportunity to prioritize some of the weak links that you maybe have in your body. So some of the common things that we see in cyclists here at the movement are things like hamstring strength, hip mobility, upper back strength and mobility. And so carving out that time at the end of your session to maybe put a little bit of focus time into those areas is what I would advocate for, right? And, you know, we love talking about this stuff. So if any of you ever have any questions after the fact or anything like that, after the webinar, feel free to email us and throw some thoughts in the chat down below. But I think what we're going to do is if there's no questions specific to this at the moment that jump up, I think what we'll do is transition over towards Dee. And Dee, I think you're going to dive into post-workout nutrition, which, you know, as I said, I think that's one of those ways that you can, you know, it's one of those things you can prioritize post-workout in lieu of maybe that active recovery or long duration foam rolling stuff that a lot of people like to do.
Yeah, for sure. So hi, everybody. My name is Dee. I am a registered dietitian. You know, just a little intro about me. I you know, love to run. I'm not, I've known of Paris to Ancaster for a really long time, more of a mountain biker, but I'm really excited to talk to you about nutrition today, especially sport nutrition, because it is one of those things that I love talking about. And so what I consider what my job is today that I'm going to give you recommendations and, you know, a starting point and things to think about. But I do want to stress that nutrition is extremely individualized. And what I consider my job is, you know, how do we make these recommendations make sense for you? Because everybody is so different and you really have to take into consideration, you know, your training schedule, but not only that, but your life in general. So that's kind of how I view my role. So today we're going to talk about recovery nutrition, why it's important, and what we can do better to prepare for competition and our training and our schedules in general. So your nutritional strategy should change with your training load and training phase. And you have to take that into consideration. You have to take your life into consideration when you're kind of making those judgment calls as well, like I mentioned before. But before I go into recovery nutrition, and we kind of look at why I think it's important, I always like to point out that, you know, sport nutrition is a blend of everyday nutrition fused with training and competition strategies. And so the cornerstone, at least what I think the cornerstone of sport nutrition is really the things you do every single day. So it's the meal prepping, it's the being consistent with your energy requirements. It's supporting your body to do the things that you are asking it to do, not only from a macronutrient perspective, but also from a micronutrient perspective. So making sure you get enough of food in you to perform your best. And I really always feel like I need to stress that fact, because without good day-to-day nutrition, you're not going to be optimizing your performance nutrition. So that's why I think they go hand in hand. And so this is why I think recovery nutrition specifically plays an important role, because it's a great opportunity to make sure we're fueling appropriately for the next time that we train. So if you're not getting enough energy maybe during the day, if you're optimizing you know, a nutritional intervention post-workout, you can really optimize on those training adaptations. So what is the goal of recovery nutrition? So to me, it's the restoration of body losses and changes lost by the first exercise session, and to make sure that we restore performance optimally for the next session. And this becomes really important if you're working out, you know, 2 times a day, or if you're competing with less than 8 hours between competition or between exercise sessions. It also promotes an adaptive response to the training stimulus that you're doing. So what that means is that we're gradually improving and making our bodies better at the exercise that we're performing, which is kind of the goal, getting better at whatever we're doing. It also helps us support our immune system. So our immunity is suppressed while we work out and after. And so how do we optimize that through nutrition? And supporting growth. So this is when, we think about optimizing muscle synthesis and muscle growth. So overall, recovery nutrition, we really want to restore that balance after exercise and make sure that we are ready to go for the next exercise session. So when does recovery nutrition become really, really, really important in supporting exercise? So what I say to that is, if you're training 2 or more times per day, or if you have more than one activity during the day. So for example, if you do a weight session in the morning and then get on your bike in the afternoon, or maybe if you are riding in the morning and then, even if you have like a fun soccer game in the afternoon, not optimizing that recovery and those nutrients and, those carbohydrates will then decrease the energy in subsequent sessions. So it's really important to kind of plan accordingly and really know what your exercise and what your schedule really looks like moving forward. On the other hand, though, if you are only doing light training, that light training might not necessarily need an increased recovery nutritional intervention. So, I think more like skill-based activities or active recovery, you might not necessarily need to implement a specific nutritional strategy. It will really just depend on the intensity of the workout that you're doing. And this is kind of where, Dawn mentioned, this is where looking at your training schedule, competition schedule is so important because it will change. And nutrition, just like training, is never going to be a constant state. You will change depending on what phase you are in training or competition. And so let's talk a little bit about what can happen if you get recovery wrong. So one thing that can happen is that you increase fatigue. You don't have good concentration either. And I'm not only talking about from, a sport perspective. Many of us still have to work. We still have to go to school. We still have to be present with our families. And so not fueling appropriately really leaves us not enough energy to be able to handle kind of the daily things in life. So that's really important. We also see a decrease in performance. That's something that we definitely don't want to do, especially if we are putting in a lot of time on the bike, or, we're juggling a family, but we're training really hard. And then you don't see, you beat your personal bests, or, you feel like you're tired. That's super frustrating. I totally know how that feels. Suboptimal gains. So maybe, you're not getting as fast as you want, or, building muscle or strength as much as you want. We also see increased muscle soreness without proper nutrition. And then over time, not meeting your energy needs, and therefore, your immune system will suffer. So you get more sick and you miss more workouts, and then you train less, and then it just kind of snowballs from there. I will also, flip that coin and say, if you're not matching your energy intake to your energy expenditure, there is the potential of also gaining weight, which can also hinder performance. So it is something that is worth looking at and making sure that you do appropriately, so it can promote performance and promote your goals, whatever they may be. So there's kind of 3 things that we only have 10 minutes today. So I kind of picked 3 things that we can focus on in terms of, nutrition recovery, and kind of the big ones that I think we can talk about. The first one being hydration. So the truth is that most athletes start exercising in a dehydrated state. So even before they begin exercise. So what does optimizing hydration look like after a workout? So the first thing you need to figure out is how much weight you lose during an activity. And so how you figure that out is you weigh yourself before your workout, you weigh the fluid and the food that you consume, and then you weigh yourself after a workout. And what you'll get is the difference and in kilograms. And so then you take that number in kilograms and you just replace that with liters. And that is how much fluid you should be consuming after you work out. So I will say a lot of these recommendations, they're very broad. If you enter your exercise already dehydrated, or if you are, cycling for 2 hours in plus 40 weather, that number will more than likely have to increase. So there is data suggesting that you want to compensate 125 to 150% more of that fluid. So what that would look like is you would take that number that you got, that difference. So for example, if you lost 1.5 kilograms of weight, you would multiply that by 1.2 to 1.5 to give you kind of that bigger number that you would aim for. So that kind of that's what hydration kind of looks like and how we can optimize that as well. I often get people asking me if you need to add electrolytes to your drink after exercise. And so, a lot of these answers, my answer to a lot of these questions will be, well, it depends. And so, if you definitely should be considering an electrolyte drink if you are working out in very hot temperatures and you're working out at high intensities and for a very long time during your workout, for sure. But because we're talking about recovery, again, I think if you are, exercising for a really long time, it's at super high intensities, an electrolyte drink might be warranted. Recognizing that you can get your electrolyte, and it's salt that we're talking about specifically, through a post-exercise snack as well. So it doesn't necessarily have to be in fluid form. Because nutrition is so individualized, and I think performance nutrition specifically, it's really important to hone in at what works for you and the amounts that work for you, because everybody kind of handles stress differently. The way we react to certain foods is going to be different as well. So if you can handle eating your food, great. If you rather get it in fluid form, that's great too. It's just about kind of getting that nutrition into you. So the next thing that I would want to focus on is carbohydrates. So do you need to replenish your glycogen stores right after your workout? And again, the answer is, well, it depends. So the body is most effective in replacing carbs and promoting muscle repair within 60 to 90 minutes after exercise. But those physiological adaptations actually happen up to 24 hours. So what I would tell you is if you have another workout session or competition within 8 hours of each other, you want to optimize that window the best you can. So that means you want to get enough carbohydrates to optimize those glycogen stores so you're ready for that next exercise or next competition, optimized as best as you can. So what does that look like? So the rule of thumb would be you want to aim for 1 gram of carbohydrate per kilogram per hour until your next meal. And so, for example, if you're an athlete and you weigh 72 kilograms, that's approximately 72 grams of carbs per hour. And so what that might look like in real food is 2 pieces of toast. I just checked because I had whole wheat toast today. So 2 pieces is approximately like 60 grams of carbs. And you can put some honey on that as well. And that gives you kind of that fast digestible carbs to kind of optimize those glycogen stores as soon as possible before you kind of head into your next workout bout, if it's within that 8-hour timeline. If you don't have a quick turnaround between exercises, and the truth is a lot of us work out, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times a week, you still want to make sure you're still providing your body with the right amount of carbohydrates during the day to sustain your exercise. So that could be anywhere between 3 grams all the way up to 12 grams of carbs. It really just depends on the intensity, the type of work that you're doing, So it is something to keep in mind, and also what your goals are as well. And so what I have seen, and I do need to touch on this a little bit, is that carbs have gotten such a bad rep. And what I see often is people not fueling appropriately for their sport. And so what I will say here is that quality does matter, especially if you have a lot more time between exercise sessions. You don't necessarily need to be reaching for that quick, those quick digestible carbs. You should be making like whole food choices, focusing on whole grains, trying different grains, etc. So I don't want you to be scared of carbs, because they are important to make sure that we are performing optimally. The next macro that I want us to focus on today is protein. And so with protein, after exercise, depending on the type of exercise you're doing, so if it's a high intensity workout, or if you are lifting a heavy load, you want to make sure you're getting a high quality protein rich food source. And again, this range that I'm giving you is quite wide, but I'm trying to incorporate kind of everybody through the spectrum, like from females and individuals that might not be lifting or doing intense workouts, to males with more lean body mass that would need a little bit of more protein. And so what you would be aiming for is 15 to 40 grams, kind of depending on where you lie in that spectrum. For most people, I often recommend to start with 20 to 25 grams per snack. It's a little bit more manageable, and as you kind of figure out what that looks like for you, you can kind of build from there. Another thing post-recovery you want to maybe consider is eating a high-rich protein snack before bed, and that just allows the synthesis of your muscle to remain optimized overnight. So we just kind of touched briefly upon, recovery nutrition. There's obviously so much more to get into, but overall, recovery nutrition is important. It allows us to optimize on, all the physiological changes that happen post-exercise and that you're working so hard to get. And a nutritional recovery plan will really depend on the work that you are doing, and will consistently change. It should never be fixed. And recognizing that intense nutritional strategies are important to implement if that turnaround time is less than 8 hours. And I would even argue, if you are having really high intense workout every day for a period of time, optimizing that nutrition would definitely be a benefit for you. So I think I'll pass it on to the next person.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of connect two thoughts here, and then we'll pass it over to Molly.
Yeah.
Dee mentioned talking about like when you're under, like, let's say you're not getting proper nutrition after a race, or your energies are depleted, you feel fatigued, and you can even have muscle soreness come into play. I think that kind of ties in a little bit to what Dawn's talking about, in the sense of like prioritizing what happens post race or in the recovery process. It's like, instead of, maybe spending 40 minutes foam rolling, not that that's a bad thing or it doesn't make you feel good, could you start to think about prioritizing like your nutrition, which is not only going to help you from a recovery standpoint, but also could help like fuel you for that next workout or that next performance. So again, not to say that one's better than the other, but really prioritizing, what do you have time for, and maybe what's going to be more bang for your buck from a recovery, and then the expending energy in that next workout. But Molly, I'm going to pass it over to you. And I know you're going to talk a little bit more about recovery in like a daily, weekly, and seasonal context, and dive into why that's important, but also can be challenging. So I'll pass it over to you.
Cool. Thank you. And thank you for putting this whole evening together. This is super fun. So hi, I'm Molly Hurford. As you heard in the intro before, I sort of do all of the things when it comes to bikes. I write books about them. I write articles about them. And I help my husband, Peter Glassford, run the Consummate Athlete, which is a coaching, podcast, and content sort of network, we'll call it, where we do sort of all of the things bike related. And of course, we've done Paris to Ancaster a few times. It's one of our sort of all-time highlights of the year. So it's been a rough 2 years without it, but hopefully 2022 will be back rolling. But in the meantime, we're going to stay recovered. So, my thing here is talking sort of through what recovery looks like on a daily, weekly, and seasonal level. And the big thing with that is sort of looking at recovery as what kind of rituals and routines can we establish around our recovery. So this is sort of actually really relating to everything that Don and Dee were talking about. And just sort of taking it and looking at how we can work all of this stuff into where it's an automatic daily or weekly habit that we just do. So we're not kind of coming in from our ride and thinking like, oh gosh, I'm like hungry. What am I possibly going to eat? And just not knowing, or like, oh, I'm feeling sore today. What kind of exercises should I do? We want to have this stuff really routinized so it's easy. We don't have to think about it. So the sort of few things I wanted to talk about as far as daily routines go. We're all busy people. We don't have that much extra time for recovery. We're lucky if we can get out on our 90-minute ride, 60-minute ride, whatever we can make time for. So when we do have that extra time for recovery, we want to make it super simple. So the first thing I always talk about is movement. So this is, we've done our bike ride, but how else have we moved through the day? I don't know about all of you watching, but many of us spend most of our days hunched over the computer typing. Then we get on our bikes and we're hunched over and we're pedaling, and then we're done. So at no point during the day have we gotten out of this position. So I want to really challenge everyone to get the heck out of that position occasionally. So I usually say the best thing you can possibly do is just start your day with 5 minutes of stretching, yoga, whatever you want to call it. That could look like, 3 little sun salutations. You stand up, arms go over your head, forward fold, we walk out into our plank. We get down on the ground, we get back up. Just do that a couple times. It is a game changer for how open you'll feel for the rest of the day. And taking those little movement breaks. We're not talking about spending an hour doing a yoga session. We're talking about spending 30 seconds doing some walking lunges from your desk to the bathroom. We're not even adding extra, steps in here. We're literally just taking the movement that we're already doing and we're just trying to make it more efficient and more effective. So don't just move during your actual bike ride, make an effort to move throughout the day. Spend that time on your mobility and your flexibility, and maybe sneak in those PT exercises that the guys at the movement have recommended to you. The other thing, Don already talked about this, getting enough sleep. That is a daily thing. That is not something that we want to catch up on the weekend. So many studies have proved that there's no such thing as really catching up on the weekend on our sleep debt, right? I know not everyone's going to have time for, the 8 to 9 hours of sleep, but if we can aim to, get that 7 hours at least and optimize the sleep that we do have. So this is an easy one to kind of set yourself up for success, right? Your cool, dark, quiet room. We can have that going. We can leave our phones in the other room, or at least put them on do not disturb. Maybe actually read a real book in bed. Just have that bedtime ritual that lets you get the sleep that your body needs, because that's where the magic happens. Have your high protein snack before you go to bed, as Dee mentioned, and then just let your body do the recovery it wants. And then obviously, Dee just spoke a ton about what we want to do as far as our fueling goes. And it's funny because the 3 things that she listed are literally the 3 notes that I made to myself, which was carbohydrates that are whole foods, plenty of protein, hydrating regularly, not just during your bike ride. So we are very much on the same page. And I think making sure that those are our routines in our everyday lives. These are not just things that we're trying to think about right after our hardest ride of the week. This is just how we think through every day, every meal, every, sip of water that we take. And then actually getting back to what Don said, I'm really just wrapping everyone's stuff up here in a nice little habit bow, is picking your modality of recovery that feels good for you. So, that might be doing the exercises that a PT has recommended. It might be foam rolling. It might be massage. It might be the massage gun or compression boots or whatever. Pick the modality that you feel works for you and rock that. You don't need to try 800 different things or be doing 20 different varieties of recovery. If one works for you, stick with that. Make that your routine, make that your ritual. We want to have these daily rituals. So those are sort of the main things for daily. Then we get into weekly. And I'm sure Andrew's going to speak about this, but we want to make sure that we have off days in our schedule, and then we're not just doing the same exact thing every day. And this is a thing that new riders tend to do, right? We go out, we ride for an hour a day at sort of this like semi-hard pace and like call that our week, that's just every single day. That's what we do. But that's only going to get us so far in our improving and getting faster side of things. So we really want to try to focus on this idea of having some ebb and flow to our training. We like the idea of playing with high, low, off. So we have quality intensity, then we have easy endurance, and then we have proper recovery. And we can repeat that, and it might look a little different depending on what your time is for the week and how you're working with your coach and what your training schedule is, but that's generally our thing. We want to make sure when we are doing intensity, it's hard. When we're riding endurance, it's endurance pace. And when we're recovering, we are recovering hard. And that means giving your butt a break. So it is so tempting to, do like as Don was pointing out, the active recovery spin on the bike and everything. And my personal philosophy, and people can disagree with this, is that at least one day a week, your butt should be off of the saddle. If you're a serious cyclist, and this is from like a complete skin perspective, your legs can handle it, but that soft tissue in your nether regions, that stuff needs a break. At least have one time during the week where you have 24 hours where your butt is not on the saddle. It's a very practical thing, but it's going to help you avoid saddle sores and chafing and all of that fun stuff. Which anyone who's done Paris to Ancaster has probably had at least some situations with over the years. It happens. And practically having an off day during the week gives you a chance to do the stuff, like your laundry or, remembering to charge your bikes. Every time I've done Paris to Ancaster since electronic shifting became a thing, I have inevitably passed at least 3 people whose shifting died during it because they forgot to charge their bikes because they were in the garage all winter. So charging your bikes, charging your cycling computers, doing the meal prep for the week, all of that stuff, that's what our off day can be used for. So it's not really an off day, it's an optimizing day if you can't stand the idea of a recovery day. And then the last thing I will talk about before we hand it over to Andrew is this idea of seasonalities. And right now with COVID, it's super easy to forget about the seasons on the bike because we haven't had a real on season in what's going to be almost 2 years, right? We didn't get a chance to race last year. At the moment, we're not really looking at many races this season, like yet. So it's very easy to fall into this idea of every day is go, go, go. Every week is the same. Every month looks the same. Because we're sort of just in this cycle. We don't really ever have that race that we've peaked for and then we get to recover from. So I will say, if you were planning on doing Paris to Ancaster's virtual edition this weekend, and that was in your training plan, even if we can't go to the places to do it, still do that hard ride. Have that awesome Sunday out somewhere, near your home by yourself without a group, etc. But use that and then recover from it. Have that moment afterwards. It's just so simple to, have that little bit of seasonality, that ebb and flow to our season. It should almost look like our week, but sort of writ large. And the last thing I will note, I'm actually doing a webinar for Ontario Cycling tomorrow about this, but RED-S, so relative energy deficiency in sport, Dee sort of touched on it a little bit, but it's a very real thing that doesn't just affect young elite women with very low body fat. This is a thing that can affect anyone, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're underweight or have like the amenorrhea, loss of a period, anything like that anymore. It could just mean you're not fueling around your rides properly. So signs and symptoms to pay attention to, especially when we don't have these seasons where we are taking like longer off seasons. We want to look for fatigue that just does not go away. Compromised immune system, like Dee was saying, we're just kind of getting sick all the time. We're irritable all the time and we don't know why. Just feeling like we're not making any gains on the bike. All of these things can be signs of RED-S. So, just something to watch out for right now. I think it's becoming much more common because we don't have these like modulations to our season. So just something to pay attention for. And I will say I'm doing a webinar with an amazing expert tomorrow, and you can jump on that one at ontariocycling.org. Hashtag not sponsored. So with that, I will turn it back over to Dalton here.
Yeah, that was awesome. I have some questions for you, Molly, but I'm going to pass it over to Andrew. Let him get all that, and then we'll save that stuff for the end. But Andrew, I'll let you take it from here and tell us all about the training side of things. Maybe not so much recovery, which will be fun.
Yeah. So my topic was I'm going to talk a bit about, P2A is always super early in the year, and while we've had an amazing spring this year, it's snowed before P2A, so there's this time of transition from our indoor riding to getting outside. And then a little bit about maybe a little retrospective on like, what have you done over the winter and will it prepare you for something like P2A? So I'll do a little screen share here, do a little presentation that'll hopefully work. Oh, that didn't work. Wrong one. Hold on. Where is
that your Zwift race from earlier?
Yeah, that's my Zwift race. Yeah. There we go. That worked. All right. Yeah. So like getting outdoors, and then, what did you do through the winter? So, how come this doesn't work? Let's see here. Oh, there we go. So indoor training has really changed a lot, I guess, in the last 5 years. With the advent of Zwift. I was a bit dubious at first, but now I'm a true believer. So. We've gone from riding rollers in the garage. This is me back in 1992 with my buddy in the garage. We used to haul the rollers out there, TV, VCR. We'd tape the Tour de France all summer and watch it on the VCR in the winter, and that was us on the rollers. And, at that time, like an hour on the rollers, it was pretty boring. So that was about as long as we would do. And now we've got like this whole world of Zwift, right? With our smart trainers, and we can do all kinds of cool stuff that is, really amazing, right? We have this sort of world of possibilities that they've created for us, essentially, right? We've got these meetups we can do all these crazy courses with changing gradients and mountains to climb, all kinds of cool stuff. There's tons of racing, and some neat events, like they did the Haute Route, I guess it was like a month ago now. 3 days over the weekend. Those are races. They don't call them races, but they are. But so tons of fun stuff that you can do on the trainer now indoors. So it's really changed, I think, what we can achieve through the winter. In the past, so back in the, like, not even as long ago as 1992, but 10 years ago, everyone was on fluid trainers in the basement, and I would have said around then, like 2 hours on a trainer in the winter is max, because it's mentally fatiguing. Anybody I knew who was super motivated and trained hard or full time or did lots of hours on the trainer or rollers in the winter, while they may come into the spring fit, by the time it mattered in the summer, they were not riding their bikes. Usually, they would have used up all their mental ability. So. But now with Zwift and these meetups, and you can use Discord to talk amongst yourselves over a headset. Like, it's pretty amazing. This winter we did some meetups. We did 4 hours, which is like, I never would have imagined that was possible. But 2 hours of riding, a couple of climbs. You're doing tempo on the climbs and some endurance. Take a coffee break for 15 minutes. Everybody goes take a pee, come back and do 2 more hours, and it was like totally doable. Change your shorts in that break. That's a big thing I learned this winter. But yeah, like, so now with the indoor training being so dynamic, we can really do some amazing stuff inside and almost maintain our endurance. It's not, you can't train 1-to-1 as if this indoor stuff is the same as outside, but it's pretty amazing what we can do now. But there is a transition when we want to go outside. So, I would pretty much say your first rides outside, while they're super exciting, and the weather's changing and the birds are chirping, they don't feel good. It's different. And like, think about why. You've been on the trainer for a whole winter on a bike that is in a fixed static position, and as cyclists, we're extremely specific athletes. And then when you're on the trainer for 4 hours in the winter, it becomes even more specific. And then you want to take your bike outside and go riding on the road, and suddenly There's all these muscles that are working that weren't working before. You're trying to navigate the potholes. You're trying to maybe talk to somebody. Your brain's probably like firing like crazy, which it doesn't do on the trainer. So it's a huge shift that we stick to our training plan in the winter and we all to get fit. And then we have this expectation that it's just going to happen and you go outside and do the same thing. But it doesn't work that way. And we need to factor in a few rides, and it can, I've seen it this year, actually. It's funny, like this stuff you learn every year, right? And this year with my clients, I've seen it more than, or been aware of it more than in the past. It takes a bunch of rides where you just go out and you ride, you don't worry about wattage, and you just let yourself transition and get comfortable on the bike, And it's even things like your efficiency, I would say, is worse. Like when you go outside, you're going to need more fuel. You're not going to be as efficient as a rider anymore. So I've told everybody take extra food. And my first 5-hour ride, we've had an amazing spring. So like 2 weeks ago, I got in a nice long ride. I stuffed my pockets with food and I ate it. I ate everything. And thank goodness I had extra stuff, or I wouldn't have, I would have really struggled on the way home. So I think the part there is like, you have to let yourself transition to get used to being outside again. And it goes beyond just our fitness, right? So again, like you've been on a trainer, it's fixed and you're riding Zwift and that's awesome. But here we are, we're talking about going to go do P2A, and you better spend some time refreshing your skill sets, because what are you going to be doing? You're going to be trying to ride the mud chute, You don't want to get left behind on some technical section where you're with a group and you hit some technical muddy section and you get left behind because you haven't worked on your skill set at all since you've been on the trainer all winter. It's sort of this, like, cycling is about more than watts idea. It's an easy place to improve your result at something like the P2A, but you need to make sure you put in a bit of time to do a few rides where you're challenging your skill set once again, once you come off the trainer. And I mean, that's part of what makes P2A fun. So the better you are at the technical stuff, the better the race, right? And then so now we're transitioning outside, but let's take a retrospective look and think like, okay, what did you do all winter? And what sort of fitness did you develop and what have you got? So let's say we're talking about P2A, a race. I think it's one interesting thing to think about is if I go look at all my P2A rides from the last few years, all of them, the average heart rate is like in my tempo zone. So you ride above and below it, but that's where the average is. So you need this. It's not like a VO2 effort for 2 hours. It's not a threshold effort for 2 hours. It's up and down, and then you get this average sort of tempo heart rate. So what is your tempo ability like? Have you developed that through the winter? What's your aerobic system like? A really important part of things. And then if you think more specifically about P2A, we have some very specific efforts that we find in the race, right? You're like punching it through those technical sections. So those are kind of like these, I don't know, let's say 4-minute VO2 bouts. Not a time trial, but they're pretty hard, and you come out of there and you're huffing and puffing. And then you're on the road and you're trying to stay in the group and you have to recover as best you can. And that's happening over and over and over again. And so the person who's able to do those on, that few minutes on and then recover in the off segment on the road, who can do that over and over and over again and not fade, those are the people that are going away at the end of the race and making the splits. And then something else you might run into that's fairly specific to something like P2A is these really muddy sections that you might find, right? Where you're gonna be riding along and get bogged down in the mud, and then suddenly your legs are under all this tension and a really low cadence, and you gotta put a lot of watts in. So have you spent your whole winter doing all your efforts at 90 or 100 RPM? Or have you worked on developing a good cadence range so that when that tension comes into your legs, you're able to keep the power going? And then even in the same vein, like, there's always wind and these long, steady efforts that we get into, like that, like the rail trail section that takes us towards the top of the mud chutes. It always seems to be headwind there. And can you keep rolling? Can you keep going? Can you keep pushing on the pedals? Can you sustain the tension to ride through and maybe put some timing on the group that you've attacked, or roll through in the pace line and that kind of thing. So I think those are sort of some very specific things that you might encounter at P2A, and you need to think like, did my training help me get ready for any of that stuff? And then lastly, you know, maybe not from a training standpoint, but you know, P2A is really interesting because you have to be able to punch it or have something left for that last climb. You don't want to be going backwards up there. But I think a lot of that actually ties back into like pacing, you know, did you have the right training, but then also some of this nutrition stuff that everyone's been talking about, because, you know, maximizing that, I think, is sort of this low hanging fruit that is missing in a lot of our cycling stuff. So I think a lot of what we've talked about today and some of these things, I mean, if you're able to get out this weekend and go jam one of these, your local P2A kind of thing in your bubble, like a lot of this stuff will help you, and hopefully you have a good ride. So that's my 2 cents.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. I actually have a quick question for you.
Yeah.
And this could be my novice cycling knowledge, but what makes the difference between like the trainer and then coming off those first couple rides? Like, what is the factors that weigh into being so fatigued? Like, is it just the change in the actual like terrain itself, like, or is there other factors that play into that?
No, I think you end up your body becomes less efficient, so you have a higher caloric need. You know, so I'm on the trainer doing these 4-hour rides in the winter. I mean, I can eat like a bar, you know, doing all this work. I went outside, I ate 2 bottles of mix, 2 bars, 3 gels, and I needed all of it. So I think it's really just the inefficiency in your body. When you jump outside, there's all these new muscles working, and it's not the same style of effort. It's a big change, and it just makes you inefficient as a rider for a little while until you start to adapt.
Cool. Okay. So what I'll have you do, Andrew, is I'll just have you stop sharing your screen there so we can see everyone else. And then if there's anyone that has questions for any one of the speakers or just in general, you guys can go ahead and like unmute yourself and ask the question, or if you want to just put it in the chat and I'll ask it to them. And if there's no questions, I do have a couple questions for people. So if there's anyone that's still here that wants to ask a question, go ahead. Well, if you guys do have one and you want to eventually ask, I will put one out there to Molly with regards to habits, because I think this is something we talk a lot about often here with our clients from a rehab perspective. I know Dee talks about this all the time from a nutrition perspective. What are some ways, maybe tips or thoughts that you give people to create some of these habits? And maybe it could be like the idea of, you know, after your training session, getting into like your recovery. Like, is there tips that you give people to make that a habit?
Yeah, I mean, I think with the recovery one, it's super easy, especially when we're talking about post or pre and post ride, the idea of habit stacking. So we already, you know how to go out on our ride. So here's where we can stack in the, you know, quick warm up movements. Here's where we can stack in the, you know, as soon as we come in the door, we are taking our chamois off, we are showering, we are eating our recovery snack. You know, we're maybe stretching a little while we check our email on our phone. Like I tend to hang out in pigeon pose right when I'm like, you know, done with my ride and I'm scrolling my emails. So figuring out how to just kind of add these things onto already existing habits. I still come back to, we once interviewed this ultra runner, Jax Mariash, on the podcast ages ago. And I asked how she like squeezed strength training into her routine. And she was like, oh, like while I'm waiting for my French press to brew in the morning, I just do squats. And that was like pretty much how I started doing like little, you know, movement stuff in the morning and doing planks and everything. I was just like, whoa, that's genius. Cause normally you just stand around and you're like on Instagram anyway, like just do your squats for those 2 minutes and boom, you have that. And then the other thing I'll quickly say, and this could be, it's a book in and of itself, is there are people who really prefer adding habits and people who really prefer subtracting habits. So for some people, you know, getting rid of junk food is way easier. And for other people, adding an extra vegetable to their meal is easier. So kind of figuring out what type of person you are as far as your habit routines and stuff. and trying to kind of work within that tends to be better than trying to fit a square peg into a round hole when it comes to establishing new routines.
Yeah, awesome. That's great.
I'll chime in on something you said, Molly, that I thought was really good was this like we're at the computer all day thing. And I think, I mean, I've seen it in my clients that people have like crazy tight hips and it affects their riding. And, you know, so there's more than being a good rider than just, you need to be able to sit nicely on the bike and be mobile and stuff. So building in I actually use a timer on my computer to darken the screen every 30 minutes for 2 minutes, you know, and I just get up and whatever, do some movements and all this kind of stuff. And I
love that.
Yeah, that's
I think it's made a huge difference, you know, and I know the clients that I have recommended to, they've found it made a big difference in just how they feel on the bike and stuff. So that great habits, that's a good set of habits to build.
Mm-hmm.
Right, Andrew, is that an app or is that something you can actually like just set within?
It's an app called Coffee Time.
Coffee Time.
Yeah, I don't know if it's available anymore. It's old. It's from when I was in university. But it's called Coffee Time. Yeah, it's great. It's really
It's a good hack. That's
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Is there anyone? Go ahead. Go ahead,
I was
Andrew.
gonna say, I find if I do it that way, I actually am way more efficient for longer in the day.
Hmm.
Yeah. I bet my work gets a lot better.
Is there anyone else out there with a question for anyone? If you guys have one, you can ask it. If not, it is running a little bit after 8 here, so no problems. You guys got to check out. I just want to say a big thank you to all of our speakers. So thanks guys for taking the time out of your evening to come on here and share your wisdom. I think it was very helpful. Anyone who's still here to Paris to Ancaster, we're going to be sharing out the recording and we'll follow up with an email to you guys, just giving you all the information on Molly, Andrew, Dee, and Dawn, where you can find them on social media, where you can find some of the cool stuff that they're putting out. And then contact information if you guys have any questions for any one of them. I'm sure that they would be happy to take the time to answer them for you. So I will leave it there. And thanks guys for coming on and sharing your time with us.
Yeah, thanks
Thank
for
you
putting
very
this
much.
together.
Thank you.
Nicely done.
Thank you.
Thank you.